My name is Deborah, and I was born into a world that never wanted me. At least, that's how it felt from the very beginning. My mother, Karen, a high-powered corporate juggernaut with an obsession for climbing ladders and closing million-dollar deals, was 45 when she discovered she was pregnant with me. She initially thought it was menopause, but by the time reality sank in, it was too late to do anything about it. I wasn't planned, I wasn't desired. To her, I was nothing more than a midlife mistake, a phrase she whispered behind closed doors and muttered under her breath during drunken arguments. The first few weeks of my life were spent in an incubator at Boston General Hospital, where machines beeped incessantly around me while nurses monitored my fragile existence. Premature birth had left me fighting for every breath, tethered to tubes and wires like some alien creature in a sci-fi movie. And yet, even as I lay there struggling to survive, my mother couldn't bring herself to touch me or hold my tiny hand. When she visited, which wasn't often, she stood stiffly beside the glass, her face devoid of emotion. Her eyes flickered over me once, twice, then turned away as if she couldn't bear the sight of what she saw, or perhaps because she simply didn't care. It was Aunt Rachel who stepped into that sterile room one afternoon, her warm smile lighting up the dim space. Through the small opening in the incubator, she gently placed her fingers against mine, her voice soft but steady. "You're going to be just fine, little one," she murmured. "You don't know it yet, but you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for." Those words became my lifeline, replaying in my mind years later whenever life felt unbearable. While my mother treated me like an inconvenience, Aunt Rachel treated me like a miracle, a fragile, imperfect miracle worth protecting. As I grew older, the cracks in our family dynamic widened until they could no longer be ignored. By the time I turned 5, I already understood that I didn't belong, not truly. One day, inspired by stories from classmates, I asked my mother if I could join her at work for Take Your Child to Work Day. My heart raced as I posed the question, hoping against hope that maybe this time, she'd say yes. Instead, her lips curled into a sneer, and her voice cut through the air like ice. "Don't be ridiculous, Deborah. You wouldn't understand anything about my meetings, and besides, clients don't want to see children running around." That night, I cried silently into my pillow, clutching the stuffed rabbit Aunt Rachel had given me. It wasn't just rejection, it was humiliation, a reminder that I wasn't important enough to share her world. My father, Michael, tried to compensate with gifts, art supplies, books, puzzles, all things he assumed I'd enjoy without ever asking. But his attempts at connection always fell flat. Once, when I proudly showed him a painting I'd worked on for hours, he barely glanced at it before saying, "Not now, Deborah. I'm on a call." That phrase haunted me throughout my childhood, repeated so many times it became a mantra of neglect. Our mansion in Beacon Hill, a sprawling estate with pristine white carpets, crystal chandeliers, and carefully curated artwork, felt less like a home and more like a museum. Every corner seemed designed to impress visitors rather than nurture its inhabitants. I wandered those halls feeling invisible, like a ghost haunting a house that refused to acknowledge my presence. The emotional void within those walls was vast, impossible to fill no matter how much wealth surrounded us. And yet, amidst all the coldness, there was Aunt Rachel. Her modest apartment in Cambridge became my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe freely without fear of judgment. She listened when no one else did, encouraged me when others dismissed me, and taught me lessons about love and resilience that shaped the person I am today. Without her, I might have believed the lies my parents told, not just about themselves, but about me. Looking back now, I realize how deeply their indifference scarred me. They weren't just absent parents, they were architects of a life built on exclusion. But I also know that their actions set the stage for something greater, for justice, for redemption, and ultimately, for freedom. Because sometimes, karma doesn't strike immediately. Sometimes, it waits patiently, biding its time until the moment is right. The morning of my 18th birthday began like any other, a quiet unease settling over me as I woke up in the sterile mansion that had never truly felt like home. Aunt Rachel had prepared her customary pancakes, stacking them high with fresh berries and whipped cream, a small act of love that always managed to make me feel seen. She handed me thoughtful gifts, books she knew I'd adore, art supplies for my creative projects, and a beautifully handcrafted photo album filled with memories from our time together. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe this year would be different, that perhaps my parents might finally acknowledge my existence. But deep down, I knew better. My grandfather George joined us later via video call, his face lighting up when he saw the joy on mine. He presented me with the latest smartphone model, accompanied by a cryptic note, "Keep it handy, Deborah. Document anything important." At the time, I didn't fully grasp what he meant, though now it seems painfully obvious. He also requested I leave the live stream running during my return home. "Just in case," he said with an enigmatic smile. Little did I know how pivotal those words would become. By noon, I was back at the house, chatting animatedly with Aunt Rachel about the morning's events while climbing the familiar steps to my room. Something felt off. A faint smell of fresh paint lingered in the air, and the silence within the house was unnervingly oppressive. My pulse quickened as I approached my door, always left slightly ajar, but today it stood firmly closed. My hand trembled as I turned the handle, and then, everything shattered. What greeted me wasn't my sanctuary anymore, it was unrecognizable. The walls, once adorned with my photographs and artwork, were now painted a soft shade of baby blue. An ornate white crib sat where my bed used to be, surrounded by stuffed animals arranged meticulously across the floor. Where my desk had been, there was now a rocking chair designed to match some nautical theme. Even the curtains had changed, replaced with ones embroidered with tiny sailboats. It was as if someone had erased every trace of me, replacing it with a vision tailored for someone else entirely. I stood frozen, my phone slipping from my fingers as tears welled in my eyes. Footsteps echoed behind me, and I turned to see my parents standing there, their expressions shifting from shock to irritation upon realizing I was filming. "Deborah," my mother snapped sternly, "what are you doing here? Why are you recording?" Her voice dripped with disdain, as though my very presence inconvenienced her. "What happened to my room?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. "Where are all my things?" My father cleared his throat nervously, attempting to sound authoritative. "You see, Deborah, we've decided to give your sister's child this room because it has the most natural light. It's perfect for a nursery, and our first grandson deserves nothing but the best." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. First grandson. Not daughter. Not Deborah. Just another reminder that I didn't matter, not to them, not to anyone. My mother chimed in, her tone dismissive. "Jennifer is expecting a boy, the son your father has always wanted." "And me?" I whispered, barely audible. "Where am I supposed to go?" With a careless wave toward the stairs, my father replied, "Oh, we packed up your stuff. It's in the garage. Take it with you when you leave." "Leave?" I repeated, incredulous. "What do you mean, leave? This is my home." My mother's fake smile faltered for a split second before she forced it back into place. "Deborah, dear, you must understand. There simply isn't room for you here anymore, especially with Jennifer and her husband moving in, and the baby on the way. Besides, you're 18 now. It's time you learned to support yourself." Her words were a dagger to my heart. Unbelievable. On my birthday. They were kicking me out, on my birthday. "No," I murmured, shaking my head. "No, I won't go. I'm your daughter. Today is my birthday, and you're throwing me out." Tears streamed down my face as I yelled, my voice breaking under the weight of betrayal. My father rolled his eyes, his patience wearing thin. "Is this really necessary? We don't have time for this nonsense." Their indifference crushed me. My mother glanced anxiously at my phone, still recording everything, and growled, "Stop causing a scene. The neighbors will hear." "Oh, let them." I shot back, my anger boiling over. "Let everyone see who you really are." At that moment, my father lunged forward, his fingers digging cruelly into my arm. "That's enough," he snarled, dragging me toward the stairs. "Get out and don't come back." I stumbled onto the front porch, clutching hastily packed boxes, my belongings shoved carelessly inside. The door slammed shut behind me with finality, echoing through my bones. I collapsed onto the cold stone steps, sobbing uncontrollably. How could they do this? How could they erase me so completely? Grandpa George's voice broke through my despair. "Deborah, my love, I'm here. I saw everything. Don't worry, we'll fix this. For now, go to Rachel's. And take care of that video." As I drove to Rachel's house, the full weight of what had just happened settled over me. This wasn't just about losing a room or being kicked out, it was about being erased. Every piece of furniture, every memory, every shred of evidence that I had ever existed in that house had been systematically removed. When I arrived, Rachel pulled me into a fierce embrace, holding me as I cried. She insisted we celebrate my birthday properly, ordering my favorite meal and inviting close friends over. But even amidst the laughter and warmth, I couldn't shake the feeling that my entire world had crumbled around me. Later that night, Grandpa George sent me an email. Attached was a certified copy of the livestream footage, along with a note, "The wedding is in 3 days. Be ready. Karma sometimes needs a little help to get started." Jennifer's wedding was supposed to be the crowning achievement of my parents' lives, a lavish spectacle designed to showcase their perfect family and secure their social standing. The venue, a sprawling estate in Newport, Rhode Island, overlooked the Atlantic Ocean, its manicured lawns dotted with white rose arrangements and crystal chandeliers hanging from rented pergolas. Guests arrived in designer gowns and tailored suits, their laughter mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet. My parents moved through the crowd like royalty, basking in the admiration of their peers while I sat silently at a table in the far corner, watching it all unfold. Aunt Rachel had insisted we attend, despite not being formally invited. "We have every right to be here," she said firmly as she helped me into a stunning navy blue dress she'd purchased for the occasion. Besides, Grandpa George specifically requested our presence. As soon as we walked into the reception area, I spotted him, sharp in a charcoal gray suit, sitting at a table near the front. Aunt Rachel had insisted we attend, despite not being formally invited. "We have every right to be here," she said firmly as she helped me into a stunning navy blue dress she'd purchased for the occasion. Besides, Grandpa George specifically requested our presence. As soon as we walked into the reception area, I spotted him, sharp in a charcoal gray suit, sitting at a table near the front. Throughout the event, my parents beamed with pride, shaking hands and boasting about their impending grandchild. They seemed oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. From my vantage point, I could see them deliberately avoiding eye contact with me, likely hoping Rachel and I wouldn't cause a scene. But then came the moment everything changed. During the celebratory dinner, as the best man prepared to deliver his toast, Grandpa George abruptly stood up. The room fell silent as he marched to the front, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. The astonished best man handed over the microphone without protest. With serene authority, Grandpa addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting this joyous occasion, but there is a grave injustice that must be addressed." What followed was nothing short of a masterclass in retribution. Grandpa began by recounting my parents' early denial of my existence, their refusal to acknowledge me as anything more than a midlife mistake. He described how they had systematically erased me from their lives, culminating in the brutal eviction on my 18th birthday. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he turned to the large projection screen set up in the reception area. The video played in high definition, capturing every excruciating detail: my mother's dismissive tone, my father's physical aggression, and the cold indifference etched on their faces. The footage showed me collapsing onto the porch steps, clutching hastily packed boxes, tears streaming down my face. Gasps rippled through the audience as they witnessed the truth unfold. Some guests covered their mouths in shock, others exchanged horrified glances. A few of my mother's closest friends stood up and left immediately, muttering about cutting ties. Jennifer's reaction was visceral. Mascara streaked down her cheeks as she sobbed uncontrollably, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before everyone's eyes. Ethan, her new husband, sat rigidly beside her, his expression shifting from confusion to disgust. When the video ended, Grandpa turned back to the crowd, his voice icy. "These people threw their own daughter out like garbage on her 18th birthday to make room for their precious grandson. Let that sink in." He wasn't finished. Turning to my parents, whose faces had turned ghostly pale, he declared, "Let me make one thing clear. I am revising my will. Every penny I own will go to Rachel and Deborah. Jennifer, Karen, Michael, you are all cut off. The investment accounts, the trust funds, everything is gone." Pandemonium erupted. My mother let out a strangled cry, clutching her chest as if she might faint. Jennifer wailed about the future of her unborn child, while my father's face turned a frightening shade of purple. But the real bombshell came when several of Dad's business associates stood up and walked away, handing their business cards directly to Grandpa as they exited. It became painfully obvious that my parents had underestimated, or conveniently forgotten, that Grandpa wasn't just wealthy, he was also a major investor in many of their ventures. By the end of the evening, my mother's client list had dwindled significantly, and Dad's company had lost 3 key investors. Socially, the fallout was equally devastating. Friends who once fawned over them now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Their membership at the country club was revoked, and their names disappeared from the donor wall at their church. Within weeks, the meticulously cultivated image they had spent decades building lay in ruins. For Jennifer, the consequences were equally dire. 2 weeks after the wedding, Ethan filed for divorce, citing fraudulent misrepresentation of family character. She moved back in with our parents, wearing department store maternity clothes instead of the designer outfits she'd flaunted during her pregnancy. The nursery they had so cruelly evicted me for was now empty and unused, while her idyllic suburban dream deteriorated into sharing her old teenage bedroom with her expectant child. As we left the venue, Grandpa smiled contentedly. "Sometimes, letting people ruin themselves is the sweetest form of revenge, my love. All I did was ensure they had the right audience." 2 weeks after Jennifer's wedding, the courtroom was packed with spectators eager to witness the fallout of what had become a local scandal. My parents, dressed in their most contrite attire, Mom in a modest navy blue dress and Dad clutching a Bible, sat stiffly at the defendant's table, flanked by their high-priced attorney. They were attempting to play the role of loving, concerned parents who only wanted their daughter back. But beneath their polished facade, I could see the cracks forming. The hearing began with Rachel's petition for legal guardianship and my request for a restraining order against my parents. Their lawyer argued that they were simply trying to provide the best environment for their family, emphasizing their sacrifices and dedication. It sounded rehearsed, almost robotic, as though they had practiced it in front of a mirror. Then, our lawyer stood up, his voice calm but commanding. "Your Honor," he began, "we have overwhelming evidence proving not only the emotional abuse inflicted on Deborah but also financial misconduct involving funds intended for her care." He proceeded to present years' worth of meticulously documented financial records. These revealed how my parents had systematically siphoned off over $200,000 from the support fund Grandpa George had set aside for me. Instead of using the money for my education, healthcare, or general well-being, they transferred it into personal investment accounts and Jennifer's trust fund. The judge leaned forward, her expression hardening as she reviewed the documents. When the video footage of my eviction played again, she paused the proceedings to ask if I wished to press criminal charges. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. Watching their world crumble before my eyes was punishment enough. But the judge wasn't done. She ordered the case referred to the district attorney's office for further investigation. For my parents, this was a devastating blow. In addition to granting full guardianship to Rachel, the court mandated that they repay every penny they had embezzled, with interest. The restraining order prohibited them from coming within 500 feet of either Rachel or me. As the gavel struck, sealing their fate, Mom let out a strangled cry while Dad buried his face in his hands. Their professional lives unraveled almost immediately. At Dad's company, an internal audit exposed several questionable decisions he had made under pressure. He was demoted to a junior position with no real authority or client interaction. His once prestigious corner office now belonged to an intern, and he shared a cramped cubicle with 2 others. Meanwhile, Mom's career imploded spectacularly. Her reputation as a ruthless businesswoman turned toxic overnight when the video of her evicting me went viral among Boston's elite circles. Clients canceled contracts en masse, citing ethical concerns. She was reassigned to report to a former subordinate, a younger associate who openly mocked her downfall, and relocated to a tiny cubicle 3 floors below her old executive suite. Socially, their collapse was equally catastrophic. After a contentious board meeting where the video was aired, their membership at the Beacon Hill Country Club was revoked. Old friends crossed the street to avoid them, and their names vanished inexplicably from the donor wall at their church. Within a month, the carefully cultivated social standing they had spent decades building lay in ruins. Jennifer's life spiraled downward too. 2 weeks after the wedding, her husband filed for divorce, citing fraudulent misrepresentation of family character. She moved back in with our parents, wearing cheap maternity clothes instead of the designer outfits she'd flaunted during her pregnancy. The nursery they had so cruelly prepared for her child, the same room they evicted me from, remained empty and unused. Her idyllic suburban dream deteriorated into sharing her teenage bedroom with her expectant child, a bitter reminder of how far they had fallen. Financially, the impact was staggering. Grandpa George hadn't been bluffing when he threatened to revise his will. Through his attorneys, he established an irrevocable trust for Rachel and me, moving the majority of his assets out of my parents' reach. Eviction notices arrived for the mansion they lived in, which was officially owned by one of Grandpa's businesses. With their investment portfolio frozen pending the investigation into the stolen support funds, they scrambled to salvage what little remained of their wealth. Desperate attempts followed. They hired therapists, wrote heartfelt apology letters, and even tried bribing neighbors to spy on us. Last week, their lawyer approached ours, offering to negotiate if I agreed to persuade Grandpa to restore their inheritance. Our lawyer chuckled as he read their letter but reminded them that we had everything on video, and truth was an absolute defense against defamation. For me, however, things took a surprisingly positive turn. In what is now officially my permanent residence, Rachel and I transformed the guest room into a space truly mine. We painted the walls in my favorite colors, hung my artwork, and created a cozy reading nook by the window adorned with fairy lights. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a real home. Grandpa George established a substantial college fund, and I received acceptance offers from multiple universities for the upcoming fall semester. I decided to study psychology, focusing on family trauma therapy, determined to use my experiences to help others. As I reflected on the past few months, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the family you're born into isn't the one you're meant to be with. From Rachel and Grandpa George, I learned what unconditional, supportive, and respectful love looks like. They've always prioritized my happiness and well-being. To everyone who supported me along the way, you have no idea how much your messages, advice, and shared experiences helped. The Reddit community became a surprising source of strength and courage, reminding me that standing up for myself wasn't selfish and that I deserved better. Being related by blood doesn't give someone the right to mistreat you. Those who don't love you well don't define your value. I've legally changed my identity, found a real home, and can finally take control of my future. Karma may roll slowly, but sometimes it needs a little push. I'm sure my parents are reading this, so I hope it was worth it. You lost the daughter you never cared to cherish, and everything else, because of your obsession with the perfect family image. Reddit, thank you for being part of my journey to liberation. Life has a way of balancing the scales, doesn't it? After everything I endured, being erased by my parents, betrayed by blood, and stripped of my dignity, I finally found myself in a place where love wasn't conditional or transactional. It was real. Rachel's modest yet cozy home became my sanctuary, a space where I could breathe freely for the first time. She transformed the guest room into my room, a vibrant haven filled with colors that reflected who I truly am. We painted the walls in shades of teal and lavender, hung up my artwork, and created a reading nook adorned with fairy lights near the window. For the first time, I felt like I had a home, not just a roof over my head, but a place where I belonged. Grandpa George didn't stop at financial support, he gave me something far more valuable: belief in myself. With his help, I secured a substantial college fund, allowing me to pursue higher education without worrying about tuition fees. I decided to major in psychology, focusing on family trauma therapy. My decision wasn't just personal, it was purposeful. Having lived through years of emotional neglect and abuse, I wanted to use my experiences to guide others trapped in similar toxic environments. Every day, I remind myself how fortunate I am to have escaped my past and to now have the tools to help others do the same. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but each step forward felt monumental. I started volunteering at a local youth shelter in Boston, working with teenagers who faced abandonment, neglect, or worse. Their stories resonated deeply with mine, and seeing their resilience inspired me to keep pushing ahead. One evening, as I sat with a group of teens sharing our struggles, one girl looked at me and said, "You make me believe I can get out too." Those words hit me harder than anything else ever had. They reminded me why I chose this path, not just for revenge against my past, but for redemption. To amplify my impact, I launched a blog chronicling my journey from despair to liberation. Within weeks, it gained traction, attracting thousands of readers daily. People began reaching out, sharing their own stories of pain, survival, and hope. Some thanked me for giving them the courage to leave abusive homes. Others simply expressed gratitude for knowing they weren't alone. The messages poured in like a flood, each one reinforcing my belief that storytelling has the power to heal. One particularly moving message came from a young woman named Emily in Chicago. She wrote, "Your story saved me. I was planning to end my life because I thought no one would care. But reading about your strength made me realize I deserve better." That email brought tears to my eyes, not because of sadness, but because of joy. If my pain could save even one person, then every tear I shed was worth it. Through all of this, Aunt Rachel and Grandpa George remained my pillars of strength. Rachel taught me practical skills, how to cook, budget, and navigate adulthood, while George instilled in me the importance of resilience and self-worth. Together, they showed me what unconditional love looks like. They celebrated my victories, comforted me during setbacks, and encouraged me to dream bigger than I ever thought possible. As I prepared to start university in the fall, I reflected on how far I'd come. From being an unwanted child in a cold mansion to becoming someone capable of inspiring change, I realized that adversity can either break you or build you stronger. For me, it did both. It shattered the illusions I once held about family and rebuilt my understanding of what truly matters: love, respect, and authenticity. In closing, I want to share a lesson I've learned along the way. Family isn't defined by shared DNA, it's defined by shared values. The people who lift you up, challenge you to grow, and stand by you when the world feels heavy are your true family. Rachel and Grandpa George proved that to me. They never saw me as a burden, instead, they saw potential. And because of them, I now see it too. So here's my promise: I will dedicate my life to helping others find their voice, reclaim their worth, and build lives filled with purpose. Because if karma taught me anything, it's that justice isn't always immediate, but when it arrives, it leaves an indelible mark. To anyone still trapped in darkness, know this: you are not alone. Keep fighting, keep documenting, and remember, you deserve better.